Welcome to Illuminati Silver. We tell you the truth about silver. Today is Wednesday, the 4th of September, 2019. And we have with us, controversially, Greg. Greg, good evening.
Good evening. Well, not a very good evening so far politically.
I'll ask you about that in a moment, Greg. Yesterday, we produced a video where we spoke with Journo Marcus late at night, who updated us as to what was happening in Parliament vis-a-vis Brexit. As our listeners are aware, that on Monday we predicted that Boris Johnson would ask Parliament to call for a general election on Wednesday. Greg, you have been following the events in Parliament today. Please tell us what has happened after perhaps giving us a brief summary as to what occurred yesterday.
Firstly, I'll take it back a little further. The British people voted in a referendum in 2016 in midsummer on the binary question of did they wish to remain in the European Union or leave the European Union. The question was indisputable, and it was very much a binary question where both sides, remain or leave, countenanced no conditions. A leaflet had been sent to every home in Britain by the government, undertaking that this referendum would be honoured by Parliament, whatever the outcome. Much to the surprise of the groupthink bubble dwellers of the London/Westminster group, the majority of the British public, in the largest single vote in their history, voted 17.4 million of them, which was a very high vote for what became known as Brexit, which was leave the EU. That was approximately 1.4 million majority, leaving it the duty and responsibility of our members of Parliament, our government, and our Parliament itself to deliver that Brexit on the best terms that they were able to. We then had a snap general election, where unfortunately, due to confusion and a rather poor performance on the part of Theresa May, who had misguidedly listened to the opinion of a dedicated pro-European remainder, Ollie Robbins, the general election led to a reduction in her majority. However, she still held a majority. It was decided then by Parliament that they would enact Article 50, which was to leave the European Union and that they would negotiate the best terms they could to leave on the 29th of March 2019. This was passed by a massive majority of Parliament. The default position, which was also passed by that massive majority, was that if no agreement could be negotiated, then Britain would leave without a bespoke agreement on what were known as World Trade Organization terms. From then on, the opposition seemingly did all in their power to seize control, to reverse their own vote and betray the British people and betray the principles of democracy. This has continued right up to the present day. Again and again, they have set out to sabotage their promise to the British people, purely and simply to get power themselves. We were in the position that Theresa May negotiated a very poor deal, due to the very poor caliber of those negotiating that deal, and the deal was turned down on, as I recall, 3 occasions by Parliament. That meant that under Parliament's own undertaking, we would leave without a bespoke deal on the 29th of March, 2019. The opposition so successfully sabotaged the situation in the interest of getting power for themselves and quite literally weenie waggling and betraying Parliament and our democracy, that Parliament and the government and our Prime Minister Theresa May could not deliver their promise because they had been sabotaged. This led to a change of Prime Minister, Theresa May having resigned in failure after a very stalwart effort, time and again, to get her deal through Parliament, but she had failed. There was then an election within the Tory party, who were the ruling party in our government, to elect a new Prime Minister. This is how the British democracy works. The party is elected, but the parliamentarians and the party members select the individual to be their leader, not the whole country. This has always been the case, and was exactly the same case when Brown in the Labour Party took over when Tony Blair resigned as leader of the Labour Party and Prime Minister of Britain. So it has been an accepted method within all British political parties. Boris Johnson was elected by a very clear majority and took over the role of Prime Minister, having been approved by Her Majesty the Queen. He moved into Downing Street, and in his early speeches, he stated that, as agreed by Theresa May, there had been an extension of the period from the 29th of March 2019. There had been 2 periods of extension the latter being until the 31st of October. Our Prime Minister, in accord with the promise of what was the Labour Party and the Tory Party manifesto, undertook that he would deliver Brexit on the 31st of October. However, yet again, the scoundrels in the opposition and a few disloyal Tories, for the sake of their own egos and for the sake of their own power, have so far blocked his ability to deliver. Yesterday's debate in Parliament was put forward by the opposition that the negotiating tool of a no bespoke deal, which would be disadvantageous to the British, but also exceedingly disadvantageous to the residual European Union members, should be removed from the negotiating table, and that Boris Johnson should tell Parliament, in open Parliament, exactly what the terms of his negotiation would be. Now, many amongst you may not have negotiated major international deals. Many of you may not have negotiated business deals. However, I'm sure most of you will be conversant with card games. Let us take a game of poker. Boris Johnson is sitting there with a hand which has some good and some bad. And it is his job, because the stakes are high, to negotiate the best terms he is able in order to win that particular hand of poker. Yet the opposition have put him in the ludicrous position of being expected to show his hand to all and sundry before the game commences, a guaranteed way to force him into a position of a weak and useless hand that can be dictated to by his opponents, 27 of them, at the poker table. In other words, to accept whatever deal the European Union was prepared to force on the United Kingdom without any, yes, any input from Britain. Somewhat similar to a slave agreement. So that was the outcome which was voted on today and passed by a majority of, as I recall, 28. It was either 27 or 28. That Boris Johnson would continue to negotiate with the European Union having shown them exactly what his hand was before the game commenced. And should he be unable to get a bespoke deal that was not seriously damaging, it would be a miracle. And in the realization that he would not be able to, he was then given the option to extend the game of poker to further hands to be completed by a date in January 2020. But there was no guarantee that the European Union would either agree to this extension or alter their terms. And under the betrayal by the opposition parties and some 20 members of Boris Johnson's own party, Britain was in a position of being all but eternally in the European Union, not just as a vassal state, but as a milk cow and the slave of the European Union, as we would have absolutely no voice in our own governance, even on a shared basis. Boris Johnson responded most laudably by pointing this out on the floor of the House of Commons and immediately calling for a general election, because effectively he was not prepared to lead the country to the disaster that the opposition parties wished to impose on it. And he was not willing to betray the British people and the undertaking of our government to the British people at the time of the referendum, that the outcome of that referendum would be honoured by the government. Now, Boris Johnson is, to quote the old saying, something of a curate's egg to people. He has his good points, but he has his easily lampooned bad points. I believe he has risen admirably to the charges that were placed upon him and to the duties he was appointed, in fact elected, to acquit. He has in the past had various jobs where it has been said that he played the buffoon. However, he was the most successful buffoon we have ever had as Mayor of London, far outstripping any other Mayor of London that we have had. And although London is primarily what is termed a left-wing city, i.e. a city that would naturally be represented by the Labour Party, on democratic voting, not only was he invested with the job of Mayor of London once, but he acquitted the job for all his jokey manner and for all his faults. He acquitted it so admirably that self-same Labour / left-wing city voted him into office for a second time. He has historically risen to the challenges of the time.
Greg.
Now, he is not a person who I personally would have welcomed to the position of Prime Minister. But we are now in the position where he is in direct confrontation with Parliament demanding an election.
Greg, thank you for that historical background. In summary, are you saying that today the Labour Party managed to get through the House of Commons a vote in favour of stopping Boris Johnson and his government negotiating a no-deal Brexit, and he, in retaliation, has requested a vote for a general election? Is that correct?
Indeed, the opposition in Parliament has voted against Parliament, against their own undertaking, against their promises, against the majority votes that they had made, in betrayal of the British people, the British Parliament, and the British democracy.
Yes. Okay, but where does he go from here? Because I've heard through another source that this bill that the House of Commons has voted in favour of, which is to stop a no-deal Brexit, has to go to the House of Lords in order for it to be made law. And I am told by someone from the House of Lords, it is the Tory peers' intention to actually frustrate that bill by having other bills debated before it. In other words, so that that will not have enough time to pass through the House of Lords. Now, have you heard that? Because I got that call at about 5 o'clock today.
I have indeed heard that. However, a form of filibustering in the House of Lords will lead to a further constitutional crisis, where, having stacked the House of Lords with an excessive number of EU loyal EU pensioners who have given an undertaking that they will uphold the wishes of the EU, which of course would be in preference to their duty to uphold the best interests of these United Kingdoms, of course, would be to honour promises given by our government. I believe that any effort at filibustering in the House of Lords will meet with very open wrath from the scoundrels in Parliament who are desperate to betray the people.
Right. So 10 minutes ago, the BBC reported that Johnson has called for his MPs to back his plan to hold an early general election on the 15th of October. So where are we at with that? What is necessary to determine whether that election goes ahead?
Theoretically, or should I say constitutionally, under the fixed term Parliament bill, he cannot demand a general election. He must put it to the vote, and in order to put it to the vote and win it, he must be supported by 2/3 of the members of the House, because it is a change of a pre-existent fixed-term Parliament bill.
So let's suppose he puts that bill to the House and the House rejects it. So he's now faced with a situation whereby he is supposed to come out of the EU on the 31st of October. He cannot have a no-deal Brexit. So far, Parliament has rejected every deal that has been put before them, vis-à-vis Theresa May. it is extremely unlikely, not impossible, but extremely unlikely that he will be able to negotiate a better deal in the couple of weeks that he's got available to him. So what happens?
Firstly, may I call you to task, not your error, but you use the term a no-deal Brexit. This is a device, Aesopian language to mislead the public and the dullards in our parliament. There is no such thing as a no-deal Brexit, because the default position on being unable to set a bespoke Brexit deal is that we would come out without a bespoke Brexit deal on World Trade Organization, known to many as WTO terms. That is not a no deal, and that is what the deal is. It is very clearly defined. It is then, during the ensuing days, months, possibly even years, the duty of our parliament to put flesh on the somewhat skeletal WTO agreed deal and negotiate different aspects on an ongoing basis. Over 100 countries around the world, including many major economies, deal with the European Union on WTO rules.
Okay, but
yes, it would be inconvenient, but it would not be the disaster that the implication that there is no deal implies.
Okay, that's a fair comment, but we are playing with semantics, because Parliament has now said that basically he cannot come out of the EU without an agreed deal. And let me read to you what the leader of the Scottish National Party said in Westminster today. His name's Ian Blackford. And this is what he said.
And you find nobody of integrity?
No, well, it doesn't matter, because this is the question I have for you. Mr. Johnson must accept the will of this House, accept the bill that Parliament has passed, accept your duty as Prime Minister, and go to the European Council on the 17th of October and negotiate the extension you have been instructed to deliver, unquote. So has Johnson been instructed to now go for an extension?
He has been instructed to. However, he has put forward the fact that effectively he has no willingness to, by seeking to be a part of a general election. It would be perfectly within his rights to attend the European Union on the 17th of October, which is the date of the relevant meeting, and sit there and spend his time whistling Dixie, because the European Union is in a position to tell him what he wants, because his negotiating position has been utterly emasculated by the scoundrels in Parliament.
So what happens then, Greg? What happens? He has been told by law now, if it's passed, that he must have a negotiated deal. Now, whether he goes to Brussels and whistles all day, whether he doesn't even bother to go to Brussels and says, I'm not turning up.
No, he is compelled by law
Yes.
to go to Brussels.
So what happens on the 31st of October? That is the question everyone wants to know. Johnson does not want to do a deal unless it is highly favourable to the UK, which you and I both know the EU will not accept, because they cannot afford other members to leave the EU on the basis that Britain got a great deal. So that's not going to happen. Let's be realistic about this. So my question to you is, if he is frustrated in getting a general election, the bill is passed. If it is given royal assent, which it can be before the Brexit deadline date, what happens? He goes to the council, the EU council, he sits on his hands, he says nothing, or he whistles as you suggest. What happens on the 31st of October? Do you know?
No one knows.
And this is the dilemma that the country is facing.
You're correct. The dilemma is that this places us in totally uncharted waters. Constitutionally, as far as international agreements under the Vienna Agreement on International Treaties, and he is in a position to act honourably against the new law as passed by Parliament, but it would then be a matter for the courts to decide. But what no one seems to have realised is that because we would still be in the European Union, that would be not decided by Britain's courts. We would have justice seized from us, and it would be imposed on us by what I consider to be corrupt European law.
Greg, on that note, I just want one final question to ask you. Let us make an assumption for a moment, and this is probably not going to happen, but let us make the assumption that Parliament does vote for an election before the 31st of October. What do you think will then happen?
I personally think that the people, having decided, and do not forget that again and again and again, the opposition to Brexit wished to rerun in true European manner an election which they lost in 2016, just as the European Union forced a second referendum on Ireland when it voted against the new European Constitution, which they promptly republished to look different by using a different point size so that it ended up as being a different number of pages, and renamed it the Lisbon Treaty, yet it was in all substance identical. But Ireland was forced to vote a second time because Europe's alien style of governance would not countenance the fact that the Irish had voted against the new European Constitution. And I believe that the government will be re-elected I believe they will be re-elected by a larger majority, because the vast majority of people in this country have seen through the weenie waggling of the opposition in their efforts to seize power for themselves. There is no way that it is responsible, when seeking to captain the ship of state, to seize it when there are rocks on the one side and on the other side there are sand beds and reefs.
So,
Just
Greg, sorry, Greg. Yeah, you've made that point very clear.
On the tiller,
yes,
and try to turn it around, where if you turn to the left, you end up on the rocks, and if you turn to the right, you end up sinking because you're stuck in the sand.
I'm running out of time, Greg. I wanted a specific answer from you. If Boris Johnson has an election, you say he will win that election. What our members want to know is, what can he then do that's different to that which he is forced to do at this moment? And please, 2 lines or 3 lines if you can.
He will be in a position exactly the same as he is now, surrounded by duplicitous MPs who will go out of their way to betray Britain, betray our democracy, betray our parliament, and betray our people, having made solemn promises to honour Brexit.
So in your analysis, an election is a waste of time because there will be no change.
Election is a device to show just how duplicitous the opposition is being in its attempted grab for power.
But it won't be the opposition, Greg. If he gets a majority, as you say, a significant majority, then it's his own party that will be betraying him, is what you're saying.
I am saying that an adequate percentage of his own party is likely to betray him.
So but there will be no exit from the EU.
Majority, and yes. I believe that he may well turn the tables and be able still to deliver Brexit on the 31st. Failure to do so, whoever is in power, is a betrayal of democracy.
I can't let you off the hook. A moment ago, you said that if there is an election before the 31st of October, he will win that election, and significantly, but his MPs will turn against him and still vote for basically for a no Brexit or its equivalent deal. Thereby, he cannot come out of the EU. And then you said he'll find a way to do it. How?
Yes, that way is simple. I stated I believe he will have an enlarged majority. That will mean that although the existing 20-odd MPs who have betrayed the party and the people, who come from the Tory party, are permitted to stand as Tories again in the election. If they are, as it now appears, deselected and new candidates stand, it is my belief that he will have sufficient majority still to deliver Brexit on the 31st of October. There is one ponderable that we have not considered. What will Brexit do, the Brexit party do in their personal interest, as opposed to what should they do in the interest of our country?
Greg, that's a great question to end this debate on. I've no doubt we'll have another one in the next few days. Greg, thank you very much. I really appreciate your contribution and your views.
Thank you, and good night, and good luck.